We were sent into Fallujah, tasked with securing a sector we'd been briefed on as high risk. But what we encountered there, it wasn't just another hostile environment. No, this was something beyond the realm of warfare, something that shouldn't exist. We were about to find out just how true that was. I was a staff sergeant at the time, part of a combined arms infantry unit. It was late 2004, the heat of the insurgency, and Fallujah was a place that felt like it was swallowed by war. We'd been through multiple operations in the region, but this one, it felt different from the start. It was part of Operation Phantom Fury, the assault to reclaim the city from insurgent control. On paper, it was just another mission. Secure an area, clear out any enemy combatants, and establish a foothold. We were supposed to be there for a night, in, clear, and out. But even before we got to the briefing room, I knew something was off. The briefing was held in a makeshift tent, standard for that part of the world. The air was thick with tension, as always. The usual chatter of grizzled soldiers and officers, the sound of papers rustling, and the low hum of generators in the distance. But something felt different. I've been on enough operations to recognize when things don't feel right, and that's exactly what this felt like. No one said it, but you could feel it in the room. Even the officers had that look in their eyes. That haunted, just got back from the front line look. Like they knew this wasn't going to be just another sweep through the city. Major Carter, our CO, gave the briefing. He was a seasoned vet, a no-nonsense leader who'd seen more than his fair share of combat. But even he seemed off. His eyes were focused, but there was something in his voice that felt forced. He didn't explain everything. There were details he left out, details that we'd only figure out later. The mission itself was simple enough. Secure the southern quadrant, neutralize any threats, and establish a perimeter for follow-up forces. But the intel, that's where things got strange. Our lead interpreter, a local named Omar, spoke up just before we finished the briefing. His hands were shaking, just a little. Had been with us on multiple missions, but that day he looked scared. Not the usual stress, not the typical tension of war, but real fear. He said something that stopped the room dead. "There are things in that sector, things that you won't understand," he said. His voice was low, barely above a whisper. No one responded. The officers didn't acknowledge him, and the soldiers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, pretending they hadn't heard. Omar was quick to move on, like he regretted saying anything. I brushed it off. Maybe it was the heat, or the constant threat of attack that had gotten to him. We were all on edge in Fallujah. But that moment, that small pause in the briefing stayed with me. And then there was the map. It was a standard tactical map of the sector. But on the margins, in areas where the ink had bled a little, there were markings, unusual ones. Symbols I hadn't seen before. They weren't Arabic or anything military, at least not anything we'd been trained to recognize. I thought it was a mistake at first, maybe a faulty copy, but the symbols weren't random. Someone had drawn them in a way that suggested they meant something. But when I asked, no one could give me an answer. "Forget about it," Carter had said, brushing off my question with a wave of his hand. "We've got a job to do, Sergeant. Focus on the mission." But I couldn't forget it. It was a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Those symbols, that warning, the way the air seemed to get heavier every time I thought about it. But that was just the start of something none of us were prepared for. Something felt off the moment we set foot in that sector. It was subtle at first, just small things that didn't make sense, things that didn't add up. But after a while, it was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the war-ravaged city, or the oppressive heat, or even the constant tension in the air. No, it was something else, something deeper. Something that told me we weren't alone, and it wasn't just the enemy we needed to worry about. We'd moved out at night, under the cover of darkness, just like we'd been trained. Our objective was to sweep the area, clear the buildings, and secure the streets. Standard protocol. The usual preparation, weapons checked, gear secured, communication channels open. But the further we went into the sector, the more that feeling, that unease, started to grow. It was the footprints that first caught my attention. We were walking down a narrow alley, trying to stay low, when I noticed them. Bare, human-shaped prints in the dust. At first, I thought they were just another part of the desert's endless shifting. But they were fresh. No other soldiers had been through here recently. Wed checked the maps, and this area was considered a ghost town. No civilian traffic, no enemy movement. Yet here they were, footprints, as clear as day, leading toward the old building we were meant to clear. I pointed them out to my squad, but they didn't seem to care. I didn't blame them. We were used to strange things in the desert, and it could have been anything: wind, animals, maybe even a kid. But something about them didn't sit right. They weren't just in the dust, they were deeper, as though they were etched into the earth itself. I stared at them for a few extra moments before I shrugged it off. We had a job to do. As we moved deeper into the sector, it became harder to shake that nagging feeling. My equipment started acting strange. First, it was the comms. My radio crackled with static, nothing but a low hum, like there was something blocking the signal. I tried adjusting the frequency, but the static wouldn't stop. It was as if something or someone was tampering with it, disrupting our lines of communication. "Anything on your end?" I asked. My voice sounded distant even to myself, like I was talking through a thick fog. "No, Sarge, it's all clear," came the reply. But there was no confidence in the response, just a shared tension that had begun to settle in the squad. The more I tried to clear the static, the worse it got. And I wasn't the only one who felt it. I saw the others glancing at each other, unease settling like a thick layer on their faces. Then, there was the smell. At first, I thought it was just the usual rot of war, stale air, burned rubber, the scent of death lingering in the air. But it wasn't that. This was different. It was sharp, metallic, like blood that had been left in the sun for too long. The smell was so overpowering I had to fight the urge to gag. It hit us all at once, almost as if it had been waiting for us, like it had been stored up in the buildings we were now clearing. "Jesus, what is that?" one of the men whispered. "I don't know," I muttered, but I couldn't stop the shiver that crawled up my spine. There was something about it that felt wrong, unnatural. We pressed on, clearing building after building, but the feeling of being watched never left. It wasn't the typical nervous energy of being in hostile territory. This was something different. There was a stillness in the air that didn't belong in a war zone. The usual sounds of distant gunfire, the hum of machinery, the shouts of soldiers, all of it was gone. The world around us had become silent, not quiet, but completely still. It was as if the city itself was holding its breath. As we entered a small courtyard, I noticed something in the dirt, old symbols carved into the ground. They weren't military markings, not like anything Wed been trained to recognize. They were ancient, almost tribal, scratched into the earth as if someone had gone to great lengths to make them. I knelt down to get a closer look. The symbols weren't just random, they had a pattern, something that felt deliberate. My hand hovered over them, but something inside me told me not to touch them, not to get too close. "Anyone else see this?" I asked, but my voice felt weak, swallowed up by the unnatural silence that surrounded us. The rest of the squad just shook their heads, too focused on the mission to care about old markings on the ground. But I couldn't ignore them. They were too intentional, too out of place. They felt like a warning, but from who? And why? And then, in the distance, I thought I saw movement. Just a flicker, barely noticeable, but enough to make my heart skip a beat. It was a figure standing in the shadow of an old building. I quickly raised my rifle, but the figure was gone in the blink of an eye. I scanned the area, my pulse racing, but there was nothing. Nothing but the eerie stillness. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, but that was just the beginning. We were moving through the narrow streets, the city a maze of rubble and dust. The air felt thick, like something was hanging over us, waiting. Everything up until that point had been routine, gripping the rifles, checking the corners, clearing the buildings. But then, something shifted. It was so subtle at first I almost convinced myself it was nothing. It started with a sound, distant, barely audible but unmistakable. A soft scraping, like metal dragging across stone. It didn't fit with the sounds of war. There were no artillery strikes, no gunfire, nothing that could explain it. I turned my head, expecting to see one of the guys adjusting their gear, but no one was moving. They were all still, their eyes scanning the street. I cleared my throat, trying to shake the feeling off. It had to be the wind, I told myself. or some kind of leftover debris shifting. But the sound came again, this time closer. It echoed off the walls around us, sending a cold chill down my spine. It was sharp and deliberate, like it was trying to get our attention. I was about to speak up when I saw it, a shadow. Not the kind you'd see when a soldier moved under a street lamp. This one was wrong. It stretched unnaturally across the wall, as if it didn't belong to anything at all. It flickered in the corner of my eye, and when I turned to look directly at it, it vanished. Just like that. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice shaking. Nobody answered. But I could tell by their faces that they saw it too. They were looking around, eyes darting, trying to make sense of the emptiness. My hands tightened around my rifle, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I looked over at Omar, our interpreter. He was frozen, his face pale, his eyes wide with something I couldn't place. His mouth moved, but no words came out. Then finally he whispered, It's not just the enemy. We're not alone." Before I could respond, the radios cut out. No static, no chatter, just dead air. I tried to make contact, but there was nothing. My heart pounded. This wasn't just equipment failure. This wasn't normal. And then came the real shock. A figure appeared, standing right in front of us. It was human in shape, but its features, they weren't human. It was as if the air itself had taken form, swirling and twisting into something we weren't meant to see. My stomach turned, and I raised my rifle, but my hands felt weak, unsteady. We weren't alone anymore. The entity was standing there, in front of us. It wasn't human. Hell, it didn't even look like anything that should exist in this world. Its shape flickered, like it couldn't decide what it was. One moment, it looked like a man, tall, gaunt, its face obscured by shadows. The next, it was a blur, an amalgamation of shifting black shapes that twisted and merged like something out of a nightmare. My rifle was in my hands, but I couldn't pull the trigger. My mind couldn't catch up. Every instinct I had screamed at me to shoot, to take it down, but my body wouldn't move. My squad was just as frozen, eyes wide, mouths agape. This wasn't an insurgent. This wasn't a soldier. This was something else. The air around it crackled with an unnatural energy. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath, even though it was still the heat of the Iraqi night. The walls of the buildings around us seemed to lean inward, the space closing in on us, as if the very city was holding its breath. Then, it moved. The air itself distorted, and with a single unnatural step, it glided toward us. No sound, no footsteps, just a wave of energy that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I heard a grunt from one of my men, then the unmistakable sound of a rifle shot. I didn't even see who fired. Everything was happening too fast, too unreal. The bullet didn't hit it. It didn't even seem to touch the thing. It passed through the entity as if it wasn't even there. I could feel it then, the pressure in the air. It was suffocating, heavy with something far worse than just the threat of death. I tried to shout, to give an order, but my voice came out hoarse, like I was drowning in thick smoke. One of my guys, Corporal Daniels, took a step forward, weapon raised, but before he could even take aim, the thing twisted its form. The shadows that made it up expanded, undulated, and then lashed out. Long, tendril-like forms shot from its body, wrapping around Daniels. He screamed, and it was a sound that chilled me to my core, a cry of pure terror, not of pain, but of something worse. The tendrils squeezed, lifting him off the ground, his legs kicking helplessly. "Get off him!" I shouted, but my voice was lost in the panic that filled the air. I raised my rifle again, desperate to save Daniels, to do anything. But my hands were shaking so violently I couldn't focus. I tried to fire, but before I could squeeze the trigger, the ground beneath us shifted. The earth cracked open, as if the city itself was alive, responding to the entity's presence. The thing's face, if it even had one, finally came into view. It was wrong. No eyes, just a hollow, gaping blackness where a face should have been. A mouth wide and jagged like a rift in reality opened, and from it came a sound. No, a voice, but not one you could hear with your ears. It was a sensation that rattled your bones, a whisper in the back of your mind, cold and ancient. "We are not done yet," the voice echoed. Not from its mouth, but from everywhere. This place is ours. Corporal Daniels was still screaming, his body jerking as the tendrils tightened. I had to act. I had to do something. I reached for my sidearm, but the world around me felt like it was slipping away. It was like I wasn't even standing in Fallujah anymore, like I was in some twisted version of it, a place that was only half real. And then, just as I was about to fire, something unexpected happened. The air exploded in a burst of heat, like the desert sun had suddenly erupted right above us. The entity recoiled, its form flickering. Daniels hit the ground with a thud, the tendrils withdrawing, but the thing wasn't finished. It pulled back, just for a second, as if reconsidering its next move. We didn't wait. We didn't think. The squad opened fire all at once, every shot, every round aimed at the creature, desperate to hit something, anything. The bullets ripped through the air, but the thing moved. It didn't dodge or evade, it just shifted. It was as if the very idea of being hit was foreign to it. The rounds didn't matter, but the sound of the shots, the chaos, seemed to fuel it. It twisted its shape into something darker, angrier. The temperature dropped again, and I could see my breath forming in front of me, thick and freezing. I could hear Daniel's ragged breaths, his voice trembling, pleading, but I didn't know what to do. The thing let out a low growl, a sound that shook my bones, and in that moment it became clear. And that's when everything changed. The moment the entity recoiled, everything shifted. The firefight that had erupted around us became a blur, like we were moving in slow motion. My body was moving on instinct, grabbing Daniels, pulling him to his feet, dragging him away from the thing that had almost ripped him apart. But there was no cover, no escape. The streets felt like they were closing in on us, the air thick with dust and the stench of burning rubble. My heart was pounding, my breath shallow, as I tried to get my squad moving, tried to get us to safety. "Fall back!" I yelled, but the words felt hollow, lost in the chaos. I could barely hear myself over the gunfire and the heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to stretch around the creature. The thing wasn't gone. It was still there, lingering, waiting for the next move, and we weren't in a position to fight it. We stumbled backward, our formation broken, but there was no room for tactics now. Everyone was disoriented, confused. I kept my eyes on Daniels, his face pale, blood dripping from a wound in his side, but at least he was still alive, barely. The firefight continued for what felt like an eternity, but in reality it was probably only a few minutes. It was as if the entity had lost interest in us. Maybe it had realized it didn't need to kill us, not yet at least. Instead, it let us go. But the fear, the uncertainty was worse than any bullet could have been. We were leaving the fight behind, but it felt like we were leaving something worse in its wake. The streets that had been alive with violence were now eerily silent. It wasn't like the quiet after a battle. It was something deeper. The sounds of combat had stopped, but it felt like the entire city was holding its breath. The tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Every step felt like we were trespassing in a place that wasn't ours to walk. I glanced back. The creature wasn't there, not visibly, but I knew it was watching us. Waiting. We made our way back to the rally point, but it was clear something had shifted. I could see it on everyone's faces, the disbelief, the shock, the reality that what we had just encountered didn't belong in any war zone. Hell, it didn't belong in any world. But none of us were saying it aloud, not yet. No one could, not in front of the higher-ups. When we reached the safe zone, Major Carter was waiting for us. He was stiff, his face unreadable, and for a second, I thought he might snap, but he didn't. He just stood there, watching us, like he was waiting for us to say something, to give him an explanation. "What the hell happened out there?" Carter asked, his voice steady, but I could hear the edge in it. He was trying to keep control, trying to act like it was just another mission gone wrong, but I could see it in his eyes. He knew. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words stuck. What was I supposed to say? How could I explain what Wed just seen? How could I tell him that Wed come face to face with something beyond our understanding, something that had no place in this world? I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't human. And it had let us go. But for what purpose? Daniel spoke up before I could. "We need to report this," he said, his voice barely a whisper. His hand was pressed against his side, blood soaking through his uniform, but his eyes were wide with a fear I'd never seen before. Carter just shook his head. "No report. Not a word of this leaves the room. Understood?" We all nodded. No one argued. It wasn't just Carter's orders. It was the way things were done. Things like this, things that didn't make sense, they didn't get reported. Not officially. Not to anyone who wasn't already in the know. The rest of the night was a blur. We bandaged up Daniels as best we could, but the physical wounds weren't the worst of it. We all knew what we had seen, what we had encountered, but we also knew it was something that couldn't be talked about, not outside of those sealed files, not outside of that room where the higher-ups would decide what to do with it. The mission was over, but the implications, the fear that had settled in our minds, that would stay with us forever. But what happened next took things to another level. I don't know what it was we saw out there, but I know it wasn't human. And I know it didn't let us go because it was done with us. Whatever that thing was, it wanted something. And I don't think we're the only ones it's been watching. I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you because you need to know. If you're ever in Fallujah, or anywhere else like it, and you see something, anything, that doesn't feel right, don't stick around. Don't try to make sense of it. Just leave. If this video disappears, you'll know why.